For decades, the public believed every royal crown, worn or not worn, was dictated by tradition. But according to a palace historian, one crown became the center of a silent standoff that shook the monarchy from within. A crown allegedly demanded by Queen Camilla, and a ban personally enforced by Queen Elizabeth II. What followed was not just denial, but a message about power, legitimacy, and limits. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. According to the historian's account, this was no casual inquiry or passing curiosity. A specific crown was explicitly requested, identified with precision, and discussed in terms that went far beyond ceremonial preference. This was a piece steeped in meaning, weighty with implication, and instantly recognizable to those who understand the monarchy's internal language of symbols. Insiders say the moment the request was articulated, it triggered alarm not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. This crown, the historian claims, carried authority far beyond its physical form. It was not simply adorned with jewels, it was loaded with historical permission. Wearing it would signal acceptance at the highest level, an unspoken declaration that the wearer stood fully within the lineage of crowned queens, not merely beside it. In a system where symbolism often speaks louder than proclamations, that distinction mattered profoundly. The demand, crucially, was made quietly. No press briefings, no public hints, no ceremonial trial balloon. According to those familiar with the exchange, it unfolded behind closed doors, through trusted intermediaries, in language that assumed possibility rather than asked permission. That assumption alone reportedly shifted the atmosphere. Requests in the monarchy are rarely innocent. They are tests of boundary as much as desire. The response, however, was immediate and firm. The Queen's refusal, as described by the historian, left no room for reinterpretation. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, no future reconsideration. The crown would not be worn. What startled many was not just the refusal itself, but its clarity. In an institution known for ambiguity and gradualism, this decision was abrupt and unmistakable. Equally striking was what did not happen next. No explanation was offered to the public. No effort was made to contextualize the absence of the crown. Silence followed, thick and deliberate. The ban was enforced without justification, allowing the moment to pass unnoticed by the wider world while remaining unforgettable to those inside the palace walls. That silence, insiders suggest, was intentional because explaining the decision would have revealed the fault lines beneath it. Early signs indicated this confrontation was about far more than protocol. Conversations cooled, assumptions shifted. The historian notes that after this moment, references to symbolism became more guarded, choices more calculated. The refusal was read not as a personal slight, but as an institutional correction, a reminder that certain thresholds could not be crossed, regardless of title or position. In this telling, the crown became a proxy for something larger, the limits of acceptance, the boundaries of legitimacy, and the quiet power of denial. What was withheld spoke louder than what was granted, setting a precedent without ever naming it. And while the public remained unaware, the monarchy absorbed the message fully, adjusting its internal balance in response. But to understand why this crown mattered so much, we must first uncover what it represented and why it was so dangerous. This was not an ordinary royal crown. According to historians, it carried echoes of past queens, controversial reigns, and unspoken hierarchies. Its history was steeped in power and exclusion, and that history made it radioactive. The origins of the crown trace back to a period when queenship itself was contested terrain, when who wore a crown mattered as much as who did not. It was associated with moments of consolidation, not celebration, appearing at times when authority needed to be asserted rather than admired. Those who wore it were not simply consorts or ceremonial figures. They were seen, rightly or wrongly, as embodiments of legitimacy. That legacy never faded. It calcified. Unlike more familiar pieces brought out for state occasions, this crown was rarely displayed. It lived mostly in archives and controlled spaces, spoken about more than seen. Its power lay in its restraint. Historians argue that rarity preserved its symbolism. To wear it was to invoke lineage, to signal continuity with queens whose authority was never in question. As a result, the crown became less about adornment and more about declaration. Its association with queens deemed rightful hardened the unspoken hierarchy around it. This was not a crown that could be worn into acceptance. It was worn because acceptance had already been granted. That distinction mattered enormously. It marked a line between those who inherited unquestioned authority and those whose position required careful framing. Over time, the crown became a visual shorthand for a particular kind of queenship, one rooted in origin rather than arrival. Because of that, unspoken rules grew around it, not written, not announced, but understood. Courtiers, historians, and senior aides all knew which symbols were safe and which were volatile. This crown sat firmly in the latter category. Bringing it back into view risked reopening debates the monarchy preferred to leave settled. Debates about legitimacy, succession, and who truly belonged at the center of power. Reviving it would not have been a neutral act. It would have forced comparisons between past queens and present ones, between acceptance and tolerance. It would have invited scrutiny not just of the wearer, but of the institution that allowed it. In an era already sensitive to historical reassessment, that was a risk few were willing to take. The crown's past made it a lightning rod, capable of attracting controversy simply by appearing. Historians emphasize that this is why the crown remained dormant. Silence preserved stability. Absence prevented interpretation. The monarchy has long understood that some symbols are more dangerous than words, because symbols endure without explanation. Once seen, they cannot be unheard. Once worn, they cannot be unworn. In this context, the crown's power lay precisely in its exclusion. It represented the final seal of acceptance, the visual proof of unquestioned standing. Allowing it to re-emerge would have forced the institution to answer questions it had carefully avoided. Who decides legitimacy? Can it be conferred or only inherited? And what happens when history collides with the present? These questions lingered quietly, contained by the crown's continued absence. But that balance depended on one crucial factor, that no one tried to claim it. The moment intention entered the equation, the crown's dormant power reactivated, transforming it from relic to provocation. And when Camilla set her sights on this crown, palace alarms quietly went off. According to the palace historian, Camilla's request was deliberate and deeply calculated. This wasn't vanity, it was positioning. And those inside the palace reportedly understood the implication immediately. The timing of the request, historians suggest, was as important as the request itself. It did not arrive during a moment of celebration or transition, but during a period of quiet recalibration inside the monarchy, when symbols were being reassessed and future optics carefully weighed. To ask then was to test the perimeter, to see how far acceptance truly extended. Insiders say the approach was measured, routed through trusted channels, framed not as entitlement but as inevitability. That framing alone raised eyebrows. Those present reportedly understood that this was not about adornment. The belief that quickly took hold was that Camilla was seeking legitimacy, not decoration. The crown carried an authority that could not be conferred by titles alone. Wearing it would place her within a lineage of queens whose status had never been questioned, whose right to occupy the center of power was assumed rather than negotiated. For Camilla, the request represented a step beyond tolerance toward affirmation. Senior royal aides reacted with immediate unease. Some interpreted the move as a bold assertion of confidence, others saw it as a misreading of institutional memory. According to the historian, Internal discussions were tense, layered with unspoken comparisons and historical caution. The crown, after all, had been deliberately kept dormant. Reviving it under any circumstances would invite scrutiny, but reviving it for this purpose risked altering the monarchy's internal hierarchy in ways that could not be easily reversed. Why was the request seen as crossing an invisible line? Because certain symbols in the monarchy function as thresholds, not accessories. They are not worn to express belonging, they confirm it. To request such a symbol is to challenge who controls the gate. Insiders say the request reframed Camilla's role from participant to claimant, and that shift triggered alarm. It suggested an ambition to redefine perception rather than accept limitation. The fear among courtiers was not merely about optics, but about precedent. If this crown could be worn now, what boundaries would remain intact later? Precedent is the monarchy's most fragile currency. Once spent, it cannot be reclaimed. Allowing this request would have signaled that historical restraint could be overridden by persistence, that symbols once reserved for unquestioned legitimacy could be reassigned through negotiation. That prospect unsettled even those sympathetic to Camilla's position. Behind closed doors, the request sparked a deeper anxiety, that history itself was being tested. The monarchy relies on continuity not just of people, but of meaning. Symbols anchor that meaning. To alter their use is to alter the story they tell. Insiders feared that the crown's reappearance would force a reckoning with unresolved narratives about succession, acceptance, and the shadow of past queens, whose memory still shaped public sentiment. In this light, the request became a mirror, reflecting the monarchy's unresolved tensions. It exposed the gap between personal aspiration and institutional permission, between modern adaptation and historical constraint. Camilla's move, deliberate and precise, illuminated that gap with uncomfortable clarity. It demanded an answer not just to a request, but to a question the monarchy had long avoided: who decides when legitimacy is complete? But Camilla's request alone didn't cause shock, the Queen's response did. There was no debate, no compromise. According to insiders, Queen Elizabeth's response was final and unmistakable. The crown would not be worn. Not now. Not ever. Those familiar with the exchange describe the communication as brief, direct, and deliberately stripped of softness. There were no explanations layered with courtesy, no justifications offered to ease the refusal. The message was delivered through trusted channels with a clarity that left no room for reinterpretation. This was not a discussion paused for later review. It was a decision closed at the moment it was made. In a palace culture accustomed to nuance and delay, the abruptness itself carried weight. What followed was perhaps even more striking. Silence. No public statement, no private reassurance, no attempt to contextualize the refusal. Insiders say this absence of explanation was intentional. The Queen did not need to defend her authority, and doing so would have weakened the very boundary she was enforcing. In royal logic, justification invites challenge. A simple no ends the matter. That restraint underscored the confidence of a monarch who understood the power of refusal. Symbolically, a reigning monarch saying no is one of the strongest assertions of hierarchy possible. It clarifies where authority resides and reminds all involved that titles and proximity do not override permission. This was not a personal disagreement, it was a constitutional gesture disguised as silence. By denying the crown, the Queen reaffirmed the structure itself, reinforcing the distinction between roles that are granted and symbols that are reserved. Within the family, the decision reset the internal order instantly. Courtiers say it reinforced an unspoken hierarchy that had begun to blur. Certain ambitions were now clearly out of bounds. Certain aspirations, no matter how carefully framed, would not be entertained. The refusal served as a quiet recalibration, reminding everyone that acceptance had limits and that those limits were enforced from the very top. Why do courtiers insist the decision was personal? Not because it was emotional, but because it was precise. The Queen was known for tolerating discomfort when it served continuity. To intervene, this decisively suggested a line had been approached too closely. Insiders believe the refusal reflected not irritation, but guardianship of history, of symbolism, and of the Crown's carefully curated image. This was about preservation, not reaction. The silence that followed the ban was heavy, layered with implication. Conversations shifted. Assumptions were revised. The absence of the Crown from future considerations became a quiet constant, an unspoken rule reinforced by memory rather than decree. No one asked again. No one needed to. The message had landed. In royal households, silence often speaks louder than ceremony. This silence told a story of boundaries reaffirmed and ambitions contained. It signaled that certain doors, once closed, would remain closed regardless of changing circumstances. The monarchy had absorbed the moment and moved forward, carrying the decision without commentary, trusting time to dull its edges. But silence rarely eliminates tension, it only conceals it. Beneath the calm exterior, the refusal altered dynamics in ways that could not be undone. Expectations adjusted. Strategies evolved, and within the royal household, something unsettled continued to hum beneath the surface, waiting for the next moment to surface. That silence, however, masked rising tension within the royal household. After the ban, nothing exploded, but everything changed. According to palace sources, relationships cooled, conversations shifted, and something unspoken settled over the court. Privately, Camilla's reaction was described as controlled but deeply felt. There was no public display of anger, no visible defiance. Instead, insiders recall a quiet recalibration. Disappointment, yes, but also resolve. Being publicly restrained, even without public acknowledgement, carries a unique sting inside the monarchy. It is not just denial, it is exposure without explanation. For someone who had spent years carefully navigating acceptance, the message landed with precision. The boundary had been enforced, and it could not be challenged without consequence. The emotional impact was compounded by how final the refusal felt. There would be no revisiting the issue, no gradual warming, no future reconsideration once circumstances changed. That permanence altered how Camilla was perceived and how she perceived her own position. Insiders suggest it forced an internal reckoning, a recognition that certain forms of legitimacy would remain permanently out of reach, no matter how steady her public role became. Inside the palace, alliances subtly shifted. Support that had once been assumed grew quieter, more cautious. Those sympathetic to Camilla's ambition tempered their visibility. Others, emboldened by the Queen's firmness, reinforced older hierarchies. No one spoke openly about the Crown again, but its absence shaped conversations all the same. The court adjusted its posture, aligning instinctively with the directions signaled from the top. This moment, sources say, altered Camilla's long-term strategy. Symbolic battles were replaced with procedural ones. Instead of challenging historical limits, focus shifted toward influence through consistency and endurance. The goal became permanence through patience, rather than assertion through symbolism. The refusal taught a lesson the monarchy has taught before. Survival favors those who wait rather than those who press. There were subtle consequences for ceremonial planning as well. Choices once considered optional became deliberate. Appearances were curated with increased sensitivity to symbolism. Jewelry selections, seating arrangements, even language in briefings reflected a heightened awareness of boundaries. The crown that was never worn cast a long shadow, influencing decisions without ever being mentioned. Silence became the palace's coping mechanism. It smoothed over discomfort, prevented speculation, and allowed routines to resume. But silence also preserved memory. Those who knew did not forget. The ban became part of the palace's internal mythology, a reference point for what could happen when ambition approached history too closely. It was not spoken of, but it was understood. Over time, the incident faded from immediate relevance, but not from institutional consciousness. It informed how symbols were guarded, how requests were interpreted, and how legitimacy was defined. The lack of public fallout did not mean lack of impact. It meant the impact was absorbed internally, reshaping the monarchy's self-protective instincts. What seemed at first like a contained moment, a quiet refusal, a crown left untouched, proved to be something more enduring. It altered trajectories, recalibrated expectations, and hardened lines that would shape decisions long after the immediate tension had passed. Yet the real damage wasn't immediate, it was historical. The historian's most explosive claim wasn't about Camilla, it was about the crown itself. According to archival insight, allowing her to wear it would have rewritten royal symbolism overnight. At the heart of the refusal lay a fear the palace rarely admits aloud: acceptance, once visually granted, cannot be rescinded. The crown in question did not merely decorate, it conferred belonging at the deepest symbolic level. To place it on Camilla's head would have signaled that the monarchy had crossed a threshold it was not prepared to cross, that tolerance had transformed into full, unquestioned endorsement. Insiders say the institution understood the difference instinctively. One could manage accommodation. Acceptance was irreversible. The anxiety extended beyond one individual to the idea of queenship itself. Queens are not simply seen, they are interpreted. Every image becomes doctrine. Allowing that crown to reappear would have reframed what it meant to be a queen consort in the modern era, collapsing distinctions the monarchy relies on to manage continuity. The palace feared a public recalibration. It could not control one where symbolism outran explanation and precedent was set by spectacle rather than consent. Complicating everything was the long, inescapable shadow of Diana. Royal imagery, historians argue, remains haunted by comparisons the institution never fully resolved. Certain symbols are inseparable from memory, and memory does not obey official narratives. The crown would have invited a comparison the palace could not win, resurrecting debates about legitimacy, affection, and public devotion that had been carefully contained. In that light, the refusal was not rejection. It was containment. Timing mattered as much as identity. The monarchy measures moments the way it measures jewels, by weight and risk. To revive the crown during a period of heightened scrutiny would have amplified its impact exponentially. Even a different wearer at a different time might have altered the calculation. But history does not offer do-overs. The request arrived when the institution was least able to absorb the shock of reinterpretation. Archives, the historian suggests, show repeated emphasis on timing as a governing principle, not an afterthought. This reveals the monarchy's obsession with controlled symbolism. Every ribbon, jewel, and placement is curated to reinforce stability. Symbols are deployed sparingly because they endure longer than words. Once a symbol enters public view, it escapes management and invites meaning from outside the palace walls. The crown represented a risk not because it was beautiful, but because it was loud. And loud symbols attract narratives the monarchy cannot edit. Why then are some lines never crossed? Because crossing them changes the map. The palace operates on a delicate balance between evolution and preservation. Move too slowly and relevance erodes. Move too quickly and legitimacy fractures. The crown sat precisely on that fault line. Allowing it would have accelerated a transformation the institution preferred to guide gradually, if at all. Denial became the only way to preserve the pace of change. In this telling, the ban was less about Camilla than about safeguarding the grammar of power. The monarchy chose to protect its language, its symbols, its silences over the immediate comfort of accommodation. The refusal kept meaning intact by keeping it invisible. What was not seen could not be misread, What was not granted could not be taken back. The decision, then, was an act of conservation masquerading as restraint. It preserved a future the palace believed depended on keeping certain doors closed, regardless of pressure to open them. History, the historian argues, shows that the monarchy survives not by generosity with symbols, but by discipline in their use. And as the years passed, the ban quietly became permanent. The public never noticed the crown that never appeared. But absence can be louder than display. According to insiders, the ban became a silent reminder of boundaries Camilla could never fully escape. What the palace never announced, it carefully managed. There was no statement, no briefing, no clarification to feed the press. Silence did the work instead. By refusing to acknowledge the crown's existence, the monarchy ensured the public never had a question to ask, only an image to accept. And that image was one of continuity, calm, and control. The absence blended seamlessly into ceremony after ceremony, teaching the public what not to expect without ever explaining why. That absence subtly shaped perception. Without context, there was no controversy to debate, no decision to criticize. Yet insiders say the void carried meaning within the palace walls. Everyone noticed what was missing. Every major appearance became a quiet recalibration, a reminder that some lines had been drawn and would not be revisited. The power of the crown lay not in its sparkle, but in its invisibility. What was withheld communicated restraint and authority more effectively than any proclamation could. For Camilla, this required constant adjustment. Those close to her suggest her image management became increasingly deliberate, almost surgical. Each appearance, each gesture, was measured against what she could never fully claim. The ban didn't provoke rebellion, it produced precision. She learned to operate within the narrow space allowed, crafting an identity that leaned on duty rather than entitlement. Yet that discipline came at a cost. To be present but limited, visible but restrained, is a uniquely isolating position, especially in an institution defined by symbols. The cost of never being fully embraced lingered beneath the surface. Insiders describe a quiet understanding that acceptance had ceilings. The crown represented a door permanently closed, regardless of service rendered or years endured. That knowledge shaped interactions, expectations, and ambitions. It also reinforced an unspoken hierarchy that no amount of public approval could dissolve. In this way, the ban protected the monarchy's internal order while simultaneously underscoring its rigidity. Silence, however, served two masters. It protected the institution from public scrutiny by preventing a narrative from forming. But it also punished by omission. Absence became a discipline imposed without explanation, leaving no space for resolution. Historians argue this is where the monarchy excels, not in confrontation but in quiet containment. By refusing to name the restriction, the palace ensured it could never be challenged directly. You cannot argue with what is never acknowledged. Why then do historians say absence tells the real story? Because presence can be staged, curated, softened. Absence is harder to disguise. It reveals priorities without language. The missing crown signaled limits on transformation, boundaries on legitimacy, and a preference for stability over reconciliation. It showed how the monarchy negotiates change, not through declarations, but through denial of symbols that would accelerate it. Over time, the public accepted what it never questioned. The crown faded into rumor, then into footnote. Yet within archival whispers and private recollections, it remained potent. A reminder that power often speaks most clearly when it chooses not to speak at all. Only after the Queen's passing did whispers begin to surface. For years, those who knew stayed quiet, until now. According to the palace historian, the truth behind the banned crown could no longer remain buried. The decision to speak, insiders suggest, was not impulsive. It followed years of private hesitation, closed-door warnings, and a growing belief that time itself was erasing the context. The historian understood that silence had protected more than it revealed, and that protection was beginning to distort the record. What finally tipped the balance was not scandal, but legacy. The fear that history would harden into myth if the truth remained sealed compelled a break with tradition, and with fear. What emerged from archives and testimonies was not a single document, but a pattern. Memos that stopped short of explanation. Notes that referenced sensitivities without naming them. Recollections from aides who remembered the moment without recalling the language. Together they formed a narrative of restraint wielded as power. The crown, the historian argues, was never merely prohibited, it was strategically erased. Its absence curated a version of stability, while masking a deliberate choice about who could be seen as legitimate. This reframes Camilla's role in stark terms, not as an aggressor seeking excess, nor as a passive figure resigned to limitation, but as a subject navigating a system that communicated boundaries without negotiation. The revelation complicates the familiar arc. It shows ambition met by institutional memory, and service weighed against symbolism. In this telling, Camilla's position was less about acceptance earned over time, and more about acceptance rationed by design. The implications ripple outward. If a crown can be banned without explanation, what else has been managed through omission? The historian suggests this episode exposes a deeper mechanism of royal power, one that prefers quiet corrections to public conflict. Authority is preserved not by confrontation, but by curating what is visible and what remains unseen. The story doesn't undermine tradition, it reveals how tradition is maintained. Challenging royal myth carries risk, and the historian acknowledges it plainly. Myths are stabilizers. They soothe public understanding and compress complexity into symbols people recognize. To disturb them invites backlash, doubt, and fatigue. Yet the greater risk, the historian argues, is allowing myth to replace truth entirely. When that happens, the institution becomes brittle, unable to adapt, because it cannot admit where it once drew lines. This revelation alters how we interpret the past. The crown's absence becomes evidence, not coincidence. The silence becomes strategy, not neglect. And the Queen's authority appears not diminished by the ban, but clarified by it demonstrating a willingness to limit even those closest to the centre to protect the shape of the monarchy itself. Power, in this light, is not loud, it is precise. Still, questions remain unresolved. Why this crown and not another? Why permanence instead of pause? And why was no path ever offered to revisit the decision? The historian does not claim to have every answer, only to have uncovered enough to insist the story be told. Truth, once surfaced, demands engagement, not closure. Because once the truth is revealed, it can't be unseen. In the end, this was never about a crown, it was about who gets to wear history, and who is forever kept at its edge. A queen drew a line, a consort tested it, and the monarchy carries the echo still. What lingered after the decision was not outrage, not rebellion, but something far more enduring, a recalibration of meaning. The Queen's refusal hardened into precedent, and precedent became atmosphere. Within that atmosphere, every appearance, every omission, every carefully chosen symbol carried weight. The crown that was never worn became a lesson in boundaries, a reminder that legitimacy in the monarchy is not claimed by proximity or patience, but guarded by memory. For Camilla, the impact was profound and paradoxical. Her public role expanded, her acceptance grew, yet the absence of that crown hovered like a footnote that refused to fade. It shaped how her legacy would be read, not through what she displayed, but through what remained withheld. The monarchy, keenly aware of its own fragility, understood that symbols can outpace words. A single misstep can fracture narratives that took decades to stabilize. So refusal became a form of stewardship. Not cruel, not personal, strategic. In royal history, denial has often been the sharpest instrument, preserving continuity by quietly correcting course. That power of refusal echoed backward through time, aligning this moment with earlier eras when the crown chose restraint over appeasement, continuity over concession. And yet, the tension never fully resolved. Because the monarchy does not merely administer authority, it curates belief. Belief depends on coherence, and coherence depends on limits. The fear was never the jewel itself, but what it would signify if worn, an accelerated rewriting of queenship, a public invitation to conflate endurance with entitlement. The Queen's line held, and in holding, it reasserted the hierarchy of symbols, some earned, some inherited, some forever out of reach. For Camilla, this meant navigating success shadowed by restraint, acceptance edged with reminder. For the institution, it meant surviving another moment where restraint proved stronger than spectacle. The cost, however, was emotional residue, the quiet knowledge of a test that could not be passed, the knowledge that some doors close without explanation. That residue settled into the collective memory, shaping how future choices would be read and how caution would be praised. The monarchy learned again that jewels are not ornaments first. They are sentences in a language the public reads fluently. And in that language, omission can speak louder than display, refusal louder than reward. The echo remains because the question remains who decides when history is worn and who bears the burden of its weight when it is not. Because in the monarchy, what is denied can matter more than what is granted. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.